Hello, I'm PC Akhtar. In the following video, I'll be looking at gangs and will do so through a public health umbrella which views gang violence and knife crime as being influenced by interacting societal, community, interpersonal and individual risk factors. I will do so using the criminological theory of the social field. Briefly, Harding describes the social field as a game with an established set of rules and a hierarchy, with each striving to achieve social capital and advancement. Within this social field, knife carrying and knife use becomes a means and opportunity to improve one's self-position. Before I go on to look at criminological theories, I will look at some statistics. From 2011, there was a steady decline in knife crime. However, since 2015, there has been an increase, with 285 homicides reported in the year 2020 involving a knife or a sharp instrument. This represents an increase of 16%. However, there is a caveat with statistics. Crime figures are prone to changes in rules and methods. This has included some improvements in recording by local forces, which are said to have contributed to some of the rises in knife crime seen in recent years. Furthermore, changes can also be reflected in changes in policing activity. For example, a recent Policy Exchange report has blamed an increase in stop search at the expense of neighbourhood policing for the rise in knife crime. There's often a contentious point that is made that much knife crime is attributable to street gangs, which is reflected in government reports. However, whilst most violence is youth on youth violence, this cannot be said to be gangs alone. In fact, some research suggests that less than 20% of knife crime is related to gang violence. Furthermore, there's no precise legal definition of a gang, which makes it much more difficult to quantify. Look at the socioeconomic framework in the context of the social field theory, looking first at society and community. Dempsey et al. Concluded that areas with low socioeconomic status increase the risk of gang involvement, describing inner cities as built to encourage knife crime. Gangs become an outlet for economic activity. Gangs becomes a means to an end in that it facilitates lucrative business. Those who turn to the gang or the social field do so because it provides a sense of self-identity and guides how young people behave. Feinstein and McAdam observed those who carry weapons do so because it provides an immersion of intent or an opportunity to offer group solidarity. Looking at the social field, this is extremely competitive and driven by threat and risk. As Harding observes, those with greater street knowledge are better able to navigate the social field and climb the hierarchy. This includes using the type of knife, the way to use a knife, and where, when, and when not to use a knife. To this is the ever-increasing use of corrosive substances as a recent emerging trend in gang violence. There were more than 472 attacks in the year 2017 alone. Corrosive substance carriers are perceived to be as very dangerous and in a very different league to knife carriers, thereby enhancing street credibility and respect. In addition to these expressive outcomes, corrosive substance carriers offer the specific utility in that they may be used as a substitute over knives, or for which they may be used at a distance to inflict injury and thereby avoiding a direct risk to the perpetrator. As well as this, there's also the ease of availability and relatively low financial costs in acquiring these. This therefore supports rational choice theories of weapon carrying such as self-preservation. However, Denville and Neville note this should be taken with a pinch of salt and should be seen in the context of differential association, that is, the interaction and learning around the offender in an environment with widespread weapon carrying, or the social field in our case. Similarly, there's a general aspiration to hold guns. Guns, in the view of many gangs, are perceived as a tier 1 weapon, thereby, again, enhancing street credibility and respect. Firearms offences have remained relatively stable over the last couple of years. The reason why firearms possession and utility is not as prevalent as knife crime is that while young people are susceptible to the law of firearms and brandishing firearms, criminal contacts are thought to be significant in obtaining these. However, they are not readily available. As Brennan observes, firearms and ammunition can be unreliable, may have been previously used in other crimes, and therefore require considerable effort, time, and risk to acquire. So we've discussed several criminological theories, especially from a socio-economic perspective. It is important to look at individual risk factors which can better help guide public health interventions to violence prevention. Several studies have identified adverse childhood experiences as significant risk factors for weapon-related crime, which supports the relationship between early childhood trauma and violence. This can create an unstable family life, which is likely to manifest in aggression and lead to violence later in life. Gangs may provide a sense of security that is missing, which, as noted by Public Health England, is essential for an individual's sense of social identity. Holding et al. Notes that knife carrying arises from a pragmatic analysis of an uncertain social space. There's also a positive correlation between poor mental health and violence. Indeed, poor mental health may be a causal pathway from adverse childhood experiences. Haylock et al. Notes that individuals with poor mental health and ACEs should be targeted within violence prevention strategies. As we have seen, the decision to carry a weapon or to join a gang is influenced by a wide range of influences, including indirect exposure of the environment through family members and peers, as well as perceived uncertainty of the environment. Ludwig et al. Notes that community involvement and exploring young people's risk perceptions is critical for the development of effective local strategies to youth violence. One often overlooked risk factor is lack of trust in the police. Recent research has shown that weapon carrying is consistent with antisocial and anti-police behaviour, which reflects an immersion in criminal lifestyles as much as it reflects a response to potential victimisation. These lead to feelings of unsafety, leading to increased weapon carrying. If a lack of trust in the police is a decision to carry a weapon or to join a gang, then this needs to be embedded in public health interventions that span the life course rather than after someone has joined a gang or weapon carrying has initiated. I will now look at criticism of the current theory as well as criminal justice response. Guntronian observed where academics have engaged with gangs that are racialized within the constraints of the neoliberal global economy, whereas argued that the consequent economic strain theory has driven young people away from the labour market and towards a pathological road culture. Williams and Clark observed significantly through such positions there endures the reality of the gang construct, whether inferred explicitly or not, inferring a distinct cultural problem with certain minority ethnic groups and therefore necessitating a criminal justice response, i.e. through stop searches and gang injunctions. They therefore argue that the current strategy in responding to youth violence through a gang construct is unlikely to be successful. The role of fatal violence recently has been met with speculations over a number of different concerns, namely the role of drill music, which, as Ellis notes, complains a number of different problems. This has been identified by the police as a public enemy, which has normalised weapon carrying and therefore used as a source of evidence and intelligence gathering by the police in order to bring prosecutions against individuals. This has been seen to the increasing use of criminal behaviour orders as well as gang injunctions. This is even so with individuals being identified in drill music videos without any evidence of there being links to specific acts of violence. So I've briefly spoken about gang injunctions and stop searches as potential criminal justice responses, so I will go into more detail. Gang injunctions were introduced as a measure to tackle social disorder. However, Smithson et al. Notes that the legal definition used by the Policing and Crime Act 2009 is so broad that it could lead to groups being criminalised with no clear distinction between gangs, peer groups and organised crime, as is most recently seen through convictions involving drill music videos. That being said, Richard Carr et al.'s 2017 study showed that not only do gang injunctions provide a valuable tool in tackling youth violence, but work most effectively with multi-agency arrangements in place involving police, local authorities and housing associations. Much the same concerns have been raised about knife crime prevention orders currently being trialled out in London. So stop searches. Stop searches are often mooted as an important response to knife crime. However, Bailey et al. Notes that the police have relied too heavily on these in recent years. A College of Policing report found a weak relationship between stop searches and the effect or impact on reducing or controlling crime. A more recent study involving young people showed that not only do specific activities such as stop search reduce trust in policing, raising serious concerns about its legitimacy, but that in turn increases offending behaviour, whilst the benefits of stop search is at best marginal. Only when stop searches are supported by high intelligence and conducted in a procedurally just way can they be effective. Again, the role of trust in the police is another issue which should be embedded in violence prevention strategies under a public health umbrella. As we have seen, criminal justice outcomes do not work alone. We need to reduce the punitive nature of intervention and emphasise the need for early intervention and multi-agency collaborative working. I will now discuss 4 intervention and prevention strategies under a public health umbrella, the first one of which is community policing. Middleton and Shepherd observed that community involvement, which is at the heart of the public health umbrella, requires a strong relationship with effective communities, addressing the needs of victims and the fears of the community. Young people's understanding of knife crime and youth violence is not equal across all initiatives. Whilst young people are mostly aware of enforcement-based activities such as stop searches which carry negative perceptions, they are mostly unaware of non-enforcement based ones. Ludwig found that knowledge gaps associated with non-enforcement based activities in the community, especially among youths, under a public health umbrella have the potential to increase trust and in turn reduce gang violence. Secondly, as our research has shown, we have to prevent ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. It's not only important to prevent ACEs from occurring in the first place through multi-agency and interdisciplinary support, but to reduce their impact through trauma-informed compassionate intervention, as noted by Deutscher. One issue that is normally raised is how to identify those children and young people with ACEs. Michelle et al.'s recent study suggested that a multi-agency approach involving neighbourhood policing teams and early help teams to help identify those vulnerable children at an early age following police contact. Thirdly, another successful area of intervention and prevention is known as mentoring. Mentoring will generally educate individuals about the impact of violence, whilst also diverting them away from the allure of the drug market as a byproduct of gang evolution and criminal capital. This embeds well with the research that emphasises part of the response to re-establishing links with the community must be to use those who know the environment and are part of it, including ex-offenders. Queenie observes those mentors that are provided with extensive training are better equipped to deal with their mentees' trauma. The success is most recently shown by Leicestershire Police's youth mentoring scheme, and early evidence indicates its effectiveness. Fourthly, we need to redefine local partnership working by re-establishing local partnerships and local contacts that can liaise with each other on a daily basis, with an emphasis on the community taking back control. One area of successful intervention is known as the Glasgow Community Initiative to Reduce Violence, most recently adopted by Northamptonshire Police. This public health approach was successful in reducing violence by adopting a no weapon, no violence pledge in exchange for employment preparedness and diversionary routes under a multi-agency approach. To conclude, whatever strategies police initiate, a multi-agency approach under a public health umbrella to the prevention of offending and re-offending needs to be prioritised. The emphasis should be on youths caught up in a cycle of trauma and criminality. Thank you for listening to my video. I hope it was useful.